The story of St. Francis de Sales begins on August 21st, 1567, when he was born into a noble family in Castle de Sales in the Savoy region, present-day France. From an early age, his life seemed marked by a special vocation, which was manifested in his kindness, intelligence, and a deep sense of piety. The eldest son of Francisco de Boissy and Francisca de Sionaz, he was educated with great care, receiving training that combined Christian values with Renaissance culture. His parents expected him to pursue a political or military career, as was expected of young men of his position. As a boy, Francisco revealed a deep spirituality. He demonstrated an extraordinary love for God and the sacraments, which impressed his family and friends. Despite this, the pressure to follow family ambitions would be a constant in his youth. As a teenager, Francisco began studying at the College of Clermont in Paris, run by the Jesuits. There, he was exposed to high-level humanist training and developed a particular interest in theology and philosophy, which would shape his future life. During his years of study in Paris, Francis faced an intense spiritual crisis, caused by the fear of not being among God's elect. This anguish led him to fervent prayer before the image of the Virgin Mary, where he found relief and reaffirmed his trust in divine mercy. After overcoming this crisis, Francisco took a vow of chastity and decided to give his life completely to God. However, he kept his plans a secret, as he knew his family had other plans for him, including marriage. At the age of 24, Francisco obeyed his father's wishes and went to the University of Padua, where he studied law. During this period, he continued to deepen his theological knowledge and practice his faith with great fervor, participating in Mass and dedicating himself to prayer. In Padua, Francisco completed his studies with distinction, receiving the title of Doctor in Civil and Canon Law. Although he lived up to his family's expectations, his heart remained inclined toward the priesthood, and he sought ways to fulfill that calling. Upon returning to his homeland, Francis finally revealed his intention to become a priest. At first, his father resisted, but ended up giving in to his son's firmness and serenity, recognizing that his vocation was true and undeniable. Francis was ordained a priest in 1593, becoming part of the Diocese of Geneva. This diocese was a challenging mission field, as much of the population had embraced Calvinism during the Reformation. Francisco's mission would be to win back these souls for the Church. He began his missionary work in the Chablais region, facing immense challenges. Catholics were a minority and often persecuted, while Calvinists dominated the area. Despite this, Francisco decided to evangelize with charity and patience. One of Francisco's main strategies was the use of pamphlets that he wrote by hand and distributed among the people. These texts explained the teachings of the Church and refuted the errors of Calvinism, always using respectful and loving language. His fame as a preacher grew rapidly as he combined remarkable clarity with a profound sweetness in his words. He never used violence or personal attacks, but sought to win hearts through love and truth. Little by little, conversions began to occur, and Francisco won hundreds of people back to the Church. His patience and dedication were so great that he personally visited every house in the region, facing constant cold, snow, and danger. During this period, Francisco developed a method of spiritual direction that would make him famous. He guided people in the search for a holy life, teaching that holiness was accessible to everyone, not only religious people, but also lay people in their daily occupations. In 1602, Francis was named Bishop of Geneva, although his residence was in Annecy, due to the Calvinist occupation of Geneva. As bishop, he continued his pastoral work with the same zeal he had shown as a missionary. He reformed the discipline of the clergy, promoted the religious formation of the people, and encouraged the frequent reception of the sacraments. His pastoral vision was centered on the idea that each soul had infinite value in the eyes of God. During his episcopate, Francis wrote several works that became classics of Catholic spirituality, such as Introduction to the Devout Life and Treatise on the Love of God. These works continue to inspire Christians of all ages. Francis had a special gift for guiding souls towards God. Among those he directed spiritually was Saint Joan of Chantal, with whom he founded the Order of the Visitation of Saint Mary, a religious community dedicated to humility and charity. The spiritual friendship between Francis and Joan of Chantal was an example of how holiness can be lived in communion. They supported each other in seeking God's will, and their collaboration left a lasting legacy in the Church. Despite his many responsibilities, Francisco never failed to personally assist those who sought his help. He spent hours in the confessional, offering comfort and guidance with infinite patience and understanding. One of his most striking characteristics was his meekness. He firmly believed that sweetness was a powerful force in drawing people to God, and often said, "A spoonful of honey attracts more flies than a barrel of vinegar." Francis was also a man of deep prayer. He found strength for his many tasks in his intimacy with God, spending long hours in meditation and contemplation, even amid the demands of his ministry. At the end of his life, Francisco continued to serve with tireless dedication. Even as his health began to deteriorate, he faced his physical limitations with resignation and joy, always trusting in divine providence. On December 28, 1622, Francis died in Lyon at the age of 55, leaving a legacy of holiness and wisdom that endures to this day. He was canonized in 1665 and declared a Doctor of the Church in 1877 as a model of charity and meekness. After his death, the body of Saint Francis de Sales was transported to Annecy, where he was venerated by crowds of faithful. His tomb soon became a place of pilgrimage, and numerous miracles were attributed to his intercession. The Order of the Visitation, founded by him and Saint Joan of Chantal, became a beacon of spirituality in Europe, attracting many women who wanted to follow Christ through humility and service. Francis planted the seeds of a spirituality that would flourish for centuries. His most famous work, Introduction to the Devout Life, had an extraordinary impact on the Christian world. Originally written as a series of letters to a young noblewoman, the book offers practical advice for living holiness in the midst of everyday activities. This innovative work broke with the common view of the time, which associated holiness only with the religious state. Francis demonstrated that all baptized people, regardless of their vocation, are called to seek Christian perfection. Another landmark of his spirituality is the Treatise on the Love of God, in which Francis explores the relationship between God and the human soul. With poetic and theological language, he describes divine love as the center of all spiritual life. Meekness was a distinguishing characteristic of Saint Francis de Sales, not only in his personality, but also as a principle of spiritual life. He believed that sweetness was a reflection of God's love and a powerful tool for evangelism. Francis taught that virtue must be practiced with balance. He advised that Christians avoid the extremes of rigorism or laxity, emphasizing the importance of a spiritual life that was both disciplined and full of joy. A fascinating aspect of his life was his ability to deal with conflict. In a time marked by deep religious divisions, he always sought dialogue and reconciliation, treating even his opponents with respect and understanding. His dedication to the sacrament of reconciliation was remarkable. Francis spent hours listening to confessions, helping people to reconcile with God and find peace in their consciences. He saw this ministry as an extension of the merciful love of Christ. In addition to his spiritual gifts, Francisco had a warm and approachable personality. Even as a bishop, he made a point of personally visiting the poor and the sick, offering them not only spiritual comfort, but also material help. His friendship with St. Joan of Chantal is a magnificent example of how divine grace can unite souls in pursuit of a common goal. Together, they faced numerous challenges in establishing the order of visitation. The spirituality of St. Francis de Sales is marked by joy. He believed that true holiness is not heavy or sad, but rather an expression of love that brings peace and happiness to the Christian's heart. Even centuries after his death, Francis's teachings continue to influence the Church. He is considered a precursor of modern spirituality, with his emphasis on the universality of the call to holiness and the simplicity of the pious life. In 1877, Pope Pius IX proclaimed St. Francis de Sales as Doctor of the Church, a title reserved for a few saints whose teachings have universal and timeless relevance. This recognition highlighted his unique contribution to theology and spirituality. Furthermore, in 1923, Pope Pius XI declared him patron saint of Catholic writers and journalists, in recognition of his ability to use the written word to evangelize and guide souls to God. Devotion to St. Francis de Sales spread throughout the world. Many religious congregations and educational institutions were founded under his patronage, perpetuating his legacy of meekness and wisdom. At the heart of his teachings is the idea that God is love and that human beings find their fulfillment when they surrender completely to that love. He encouraged people to live each day with confidence in divine providence. Francis had a deep respect for human freedom. He believed that holiness cannot be imposed, but must be chosen freely in response to God's love. This principle permeates all of his writings and pastoral practices. As bishop, Francis faced significant political and religious challenges. He skillfully navigated the tensions of the Reformation and Counter-Reformation, remaining firm in defending the Catholic faith, but always with a conciliatory spirit. One of the hallmarks of his episcopate was his dedication to catechesis. He believed that religious ignorance was one of the main causes of the loss of faith, and therefore invested heavily in the training of clergy and laity. Francis also stood out as a defender of human dignity. He viewed each person as created in the image of God and treated everyone, regardless of their social standing or moral condition, with the same respect and love. Your personal correspondence is a spiritual treasure. Francis wrote thousands of letters offering advice, comfort, and spiritual direction to people from all walks of life. These letters reveal your ability to deeply understand human needs. He had an optimistic view of human nature, believing that despite sin, humans are capable of great things by the grace of God. Their spirituality is deeply embodied, recognizing the goodness of the world created by God. St. Francis de Sales was a man of great culture, but his wisdom did not make him arrogant. He used his knowledge to serve others, adapting his language and approach to each person's needs. At the end of his life, Francisco reflected on how simplicity was the safest path to God. He said that true holiness consists in loving God with all your heart and living in peace with others. In the last years of his life, St. Francis de Sales faced health problems resulting from his tireless pastoral work. Despite the physical difficulties, he continued to carry out his ministry with impressive strength, never allowing himself to give up serving God and others. During a trip to Lyon in December 1622, Francis suffered a heart attack. Even though he was weakened, he maintained his serenity and trust in God, accepting his condition as part of the divine plan and offering his sufferings for the Church. His last words, spoken with difficulty, were a testimony to his unshakable faith. "Jesus, my Savior, I place my soul in your hands." Shortly afterwards, he gave his soul to the Creator, leaving behind a legacy of holiness and charity. The news of his death spread quickly, causing great commotion among the faithful. Many witnessed his kindness and meekness in life and began to invoke him as an intercessor with God, believing in his power to intercede for those in need. After his death, Francis was buried in the Church of the Visitation in Annecy, the spiritual heart of the order he helped found. His tomb soon became a place of pilgrimage, attracting faithful from all over who sought grace and consolation. In 1665, 43 years after his death, St. Francis de Sales was canonized by Pope Alexander VII. This was an official recognition by the Church of His Holiness, confirming the spiritual impact of his life and works. During the canonization process, numerous miracles attributed to his intercession were documented. Cured of illnesses, unexpected conversions, and other extraordinary graces illustrated the effectiveness of their mediation with God. One of the most notable aspects of St. Francis de Sales was his ability to fully live the Gospels, embodying Christian virtues in all aspects of his life. His sweetness, patience, and love for others made him a model for Christians of all times. His canonization was not only a personal recognition, but also a celebration of his unique spirituality, which emphasized the accessibility of sainthood to all, regardless of their social position or vocation. The spirituality of St. Francis de Sales found an echo in the following centuries. Writers and preachers drew inspiration from his teachings, using his balanced and practical vision to renew the spiritual life of entire communities. Among those who were influenced by him are great saints and theologians, such as St. John Bosco, who adopted Francis' meekness and joy as pillars of his educational approach to young people. Francisco thus became a spiritual guide for generations. In addition to being declared patron saint of Catholic writers and journalists, Francis is venerated as a model for spiritual directors. His ability to guide souls towards holiness was so profound that his advice remains current. The Church recognizes St. Francis de Sales as one of the greatest spiritual masters, thanks to the clarity and depth of his teachings. He presents a vision of Christianity that is both demanding and deeply human. His motto, "Nothing by force, everything by love," sums up his approach to evangelism and the Christian life. He believed that love was the only force capable of truly transforming the human heart and leading people to God. For Francis, the Christian life was a continuous journey of conversion, fueled by God's grace and personal effort. He encouraged the faithful to take small daily steps towards perfection, always trusting in divine mercy. Devotion to St. Francis de Sales is not limited to Catholicism. His message of love and gentleness attracts people from different religious backgrounds who find in his teachings a source of inspiration for their own spiritual lives. Over the centuries, many religious congregations have been founded under the patronage of St. Francis de Sales, including the Salesians of Don Bosco, who dedicate their mission to the education and care of young people most in need. Francisco's life was marked by his ability to find God in the little things of everyday life. He believed that holiness did not require great heroic deeds, but rather faithfulness in carrying out daily duties with love and humility. His pastoral approach was profoundly innovative. He rejected rigid moralism and threats of condemnation, preferring to invite the faithful to experience the joy of the gospel and the beauty of a God-centered life. One of the reasons for his popularity is the clarity with which he wrote. Francis had the gift of communicating complex truths in a simple and accessible way, allowing even the least educated people to understand the mysteries of faith. He saw beauty as a bridge to God. Francis encouraged Christians to appreciate art, music, and nature as reflections of divine love, which awakens in the human heart a deep desire for the Creator. In his time, Francis was one of the pioneers of what we today call the new evangelization. He was dedicated to finding creative ways to reach those who were far from the faith, adapting his strategies to the needs of the moment. His vision of the Church was inclusive and welcoming. Francis believed that each person, regardless of their faults or weaknesses, had a place in the heart of God and in the Christian community. Even amid the controversies of the Protestant Reformation, Francis maintained an attitude of dialogue and respect. He knew that genuine conversion could only be achieved through charity and the example of a holy life. Francis de Sales was also a defender of freedom of conscience. He believed that faith could not be forced and that each person should have the freedom to respond to God's call according to their own conscience. St. Francis de Sales continues to be a model of holiness and spiritual leadership in the history of the Church. His emphasis on love, meekness, and trust in divine providence resonates in our days as an invitation to rediscover the essence of Christianity. After his canonization, many artists and writers began to portray his life and teachings, perpetuating his memory and making his virtues known to future generations. He is often depicted with a burning heart, symbolizing his burning love for God. The Order of the Visitation of St. Mary, founded by Francis and St. Joan of Chantal, continues its work to this day, with monasteries spread throughout the world. The sisters live according to the spirit of humility and sweetness that he valued so much. One of the characteristics that makes St. Francis de Sales so captivating is his humanity. He was not a distant saint, but someone who deeply understood the struggles and challenges of everyday life, offering practical advice for overcoming them. Among his many letters of spiritual direction, his advice to people facing doubts and anxieties stands out. He encouraged them to trust God and maintain inner peace, even in the midst of tribulations. Francis also had a deep love for the Eucharist. He saw in the Blessed Sacrament the source of all the grace and strength necessary for the Christian life. He encouraged the faithful to receive communion frequently and reverently. His sermons, full of wisdom and compassion, attracted crowds. He had the gift of touching hearts and inspiring life change, not only through his words, but also by the example of his own life. A significant episode in his life was the conversion of thousands of Calvinists in the Chablais region. Your patience and perseverance in bringing the gospel to these souls facing great dangers are a testimony to your courage and faith. Francisco firmly believed in the dignity of human work. He encouraged people to see their work as a means of glorifying God and contributing to the common good, transforming even the simplest tasks into acts of praise. In his writings, he often used metaphors drawn from nature to explain spiritual truths. He saw in the created world a manifestation of God's love, inviting people to contemplate the beauty of creation as a path to faith. One of the reasons St. Francis de Sales remains so relevant is his deeply pastoral vision. He understood human weaknesses and sought ways to help people grow in virtue without becoming discouraged by their falls. Your balanced approach to spiritual life is an antidote to perfectionism. He taught that perfection does not consist in the absence of flaws, but in perseverance in loving God and others, even in the midst of imperfections. Francisco was also a great promoter of devotion to Our Lady. He saw in Mary the perfect model of humility and obedience to God, and often turned to her in his prayers and preaching. He argued that the path to holiness was open to everyone, regardless of their vocation or state of life. This message was revolutionary in its time, breaking with the idea that holiness was reserved only for religious people. His teachings on God's love stand out for their emphasis on the gratuitousness of this love. Francis stated that God loves us not because of our merits, but because He is love, and our response must be to live with gratitude and generosity. Meekness, so central to his spirituality, was not a sign of weakness, but of inner strength. Francisco knew that true sweetness requires self-control and is an expression of the presence of God in the soul. He also taught that spiritual progress is a slow and continuous process. Francis encouraged the faithful to be patient with themselves, trusting that God would gradually guide them to perfection. The relevance of St. Francis de Sales goes beyond his time. His writings and examples continue to inspire Christians in search of a balanced life, where faith permeates all dimensions of daily life. His devotion to the Holy Spirit was another mark of his spirituality. He believed that the Spirit was the guide and counselor of the soul and encouraged the faithful to ask for its light in all important decisions. The influence of St. Francis de Sales is also felt in Catholic education. Many schools and universities bear his name, promoting the values he defended, such as meekness, wisdom, and love for others. He remains a shining example of pastoral leadership. Francisco knew how to combine firmness in faith with kindness in dealing with people, winning hearts and minds for Christ in a lasting way. Over the centuries, many popes and saints have praised his legacy. His life and teachings are often cited in church documents as models for clergy and laity. Francis de Sales reminds us that the call to holiness is an invitation to joy. He believed that living as authentic Christians means being fully alive, finding in God the true source of happiness. In times of division and conflict, St. Francis de Sales' message of love, reconciliation, and gentleness is more relevant than ever. He shows us that the strength of the gospel lies in love, not in imposition. The memory of St. Francis de Sales is a light that continues to shine in the history of the Church. He invites us to walk the path of holiness with courage and confidence, always guided by God's love and mercy.